My aunt, she cheated on her husband with my father, and now my mother's losing her mind, but that's not where this drama ends. Oh no, my cousin? Well, I find out it's not my cousin, it's my half-brother, and things just escalate from there. Let's start from the beginning. I'm 35 female, have not had a close relationship with my family in a very long time. But right now I'm dealing with some major drama involving a few of them. I'm not entirely sure how I should go about dealing with it, but before I get into what's going on, I should explain how our falling out began. Growing up, I was really close to my mother's side of the family. My father never got along with his brother or his mom, and he never knew who his dad was. So having a relationship with that side of the family was off the table. But my mother was always extremely close to her family, especially her younger sister, my Aunt Debbie. Aunt Debbie was a huge part of my childhood. We would often visit Debbie and her husband, Uncle Rob, at least once a month. My mother's other sibling and their families would attend as well. Along with my mom's parents, it was really great, and I always loved playing with my cousin a lot, whom were around my own age. Debbie was the youngest and did not have kids yet, but she loved having us around and always made sure that we had lots of snacks to eat and games to play. Debbie's house was basically like a second home for me. Well, that all changed about a year after Debbie gave birth to her own son, my cousin Brad. I remember that part specifically because I was fascinated by this newborn cousin of mine, and I was really bummed when I was told at just 8 years old that I would not see him anymore. I was also really confused about the reasoning behind it. It started with fights. A little less than a year after Brad was born, my mother started fighting with pretty much everybody. She never did it directly in front of me, but the walls in our house were thinner than I think she realized. Well, I would hear her and father fighting in the room almost every single night. The walls weren't so thin and I could make out most of what they were saying, but I would hear my mother screaming things like, "How could you do this to me? How could you do this to our daughter?" It was confusing because my father had not done anything to me that I was aware of. But I seemed to be coming up to, in those fights a lot, and it literally scared me. When she wasn't fighting with Dad, though, she was on the phone fighting with everybody else. Obviously, I could only hear one side of the conversation, but I would hear her mention Debbie's name, and it would seem that was who she was fighting with the most. You see, sometimes I'd hear her saying Mom or Dad, so I know that she was fighting with my grandparents. And I'd hear her saying something or other about how they were taking Debbie's side and that she didn't owe her any forgiveness. I know some of you are probably putting this together already, but as a kid, I really didn't understand. And even when I was old enough that I should have understood, I think a part of me subconsciously avoided trying to look back on the period of my life. Maybe I didn't really want to know. What I do know is that a few months after the fight started, my parents told me that they were getting a divorce. They explained what they meant and that it wasn't my fault, but that my father would be moving out. Well, I asked when he'd be leaving, and he promised that I would, be staying for a while. But the next day, when I got home from school, he was gone just like that. See, I didn't believe my mother when she told me, but when she showed me the empty closet, we had this extra closet in the hallway where my father kept some of his extra stuff. I used to like walking into it and just standing there surrounded by his toolkits on the floor, his old records on the shelf, and the work suits he hung on the rack so they would have more room to breathe than in the bedroom closet. I felt safe in there somehow, and now it was empty. Even worse, he lied to me and told me that it wouldn't be. I hated him for that. I only had to see him every other weekend, and I was so angry that I never asked to see him more than that. But I was angry at my mom, too, because for reasons I could not understand, I lost Aunt Debbie and the rest of the family at the same time. I never voiced my anger, and we had a great relationship on the surface, but the resentment never completely went away. I held on to the resentment for 7 long years, until the day that she picked me up from the volleyball practice after school. I was a freshman and had a pretty good social life. Sometimes my mother was late getting off work to pick me up. A friend's mom would always wait with me until she showed up. It was starting to get really late that night, and she could not get hold of my mother on the phone, so she decided to drive me home herself. When we got there, we could hear our dog howling from the outside. Riley only usually barked or howled when strangers were at the door. So that was unusual. My friend's mother looked uncomfortable about it, and she asked for my key and told me to wait outside while she went in. A bit later, she came back out and kept me outside until the ambulance came. They tried to tell me it was an accident, but I knew what my mom had done. I knew. I had lost my mom. I don't want to delve into that right now, so I'll just continue. I moved in with my father until college, and the entire 3 years, there was always a distance between us. I got to start going to Debbie's again, but things felt really standoffish there as well. Rob was still great, but most of the family treated me like a stranger. It was like they looked at me and remembered all those fights that they had with my mother when she cut contact. The only one I really got close to during that time was Brad. He didn't have any of the history with my mother, so he had no reason to blame me for it. And as weird as it is sometimes, I felt playing with a kid 7 years younger than me while I was in high school, it was just refreshing to be around someone who did not act uncomfortable around me. We actually stayed in touch over the years and became really good friends. But that's what brings us to this drama. See, I moved away about 2 hours a few years ago, just before marrying my husband Cole. I didn't see the family much after that, but Brad called and asked me about a month ago if I would be making it to the upcoming reunion at Aunt Debbie and Uncle Rob's place. Everybody was going to be there, including cousins I haven't seen since I was little, who moved out of state. The thing is, I didn't know it was happening. Brad said Debbie was the one who sent out the invitations and must have forgotten mine, so I called Debbie. She did not forget my invitation. At first she said it was because of how far away I lived, but I told her I already knew people were coming from out of state. She then sighed and explained that I simply had not been very close with anyone in the family for years, and, well, yeah, that's true. I didn't even move back in with Dad after college. I'd instead moved into the old home, which my mother left me when she checked out of life. It's an Airbnb now that I'm living with Cole in, but the point is that I really have not talked too much of the family besides Brad in quite some time. Between that and the distance, Debbie said it would just be easier if I did not come. Even though I understood her reasoning, that really upset me. I may not see or talk to my family much, but that doesn't mean that I didn't want to attend the reunion. At the same time, I didn't try to argue much with Debbie because I wasn't even sure why I really wanted to go. I talked about it with Cole, and he simply said, "Family's family." Well, that didn't help. I love the man, but his reassurance often takes the form of cliché one-liners that don't really help unpack anything. Well, thankfully, I have a therapist for that, so I spoke to her about the next time we met. She's always thought that there was a lot of things in my childhood that need closure, but she also said that sometimes closure does not require a big epiphany or explanation of past events. That maybe the closure I wanted was just to feel close to people again, and a reunion full of people I haven't seen in years might be a good opportunity to re-experience that. Then she pointed out that nobody formally told me not to go. I wasn't technically uninvited, and if I felt like I was ready to go and needed to, then I should. So that's what I did. And it really wasn't what I wanted. Brad and my other cousins were great. I loved catching up with them, enjoying some barbecue, hanging out by the pool, but the weirdness with the rest of the family was still as tangible as it's ever been. But when it got even weirder, I started picking up on the little micro interactions between Aunt Debbie and my father. Just little things. If he poured her a glass of wine, their fingers would linger a bit when he was passing her the glass. It was really hot that day, and she made some joke about how a tan my father's age could only make him more handsome, like it did for our president. Then she gave him a little wink that really put me off. It made me uncomfortable, so I tried to just ignore it, but toward the end of the afternoon, they both just kinda disappeared, and I loosened up a little again. Brad and a few other cousins were about to get in the pool, so I went inside to change. That's when I heard Debbie and my dad talking in the kitchen. You know, this will sound bad, but the truth is that I decided to eavesdrop even before I heard my name. But it wasn't long after that I came up. Debbie was really upset that I was there, and my father said something to the effect of,
"Aw, don't worry. She doesn't know anything." "Ugh, don't fool yourself. My sister must have told her why you got divorced."
Then she just went off about me and Brad being friends and how it didn't make sense if we didn't know. My father reassured her that Brad and I still both think that we're only children. All of those things I didn't piece together in childhood, it snapped into place immediately. It seems so obvious now. Guys, they divorced over an affair. But the more important revelation was that Brad's not even just a cousin. The kid my mom kept me from knowing for so many years was my half-brother. And now I'm angry to her all over again. But I'd say the important question is, what do I do now? Should I confront Debbie, my father? Is there any version of that conversation that ends well? And even if I shouldn't, I at least, owe it to Brad to tell him the truth, right? I know I sound horribly naive for not realizing all this years ago, but I can't just ignore it now. I just don't know what to do with all this information. Update number 1. About 2 weeks I posted about an affair between my dad and Aunt Debbie, asking whether I should confront them about it. I got really wide arrays of responses from you guys, but the one big one was to talk to my therapist about it. Honestly, talking to her got me no closer to deciding whether I should confront my dad or my aunt about what I learned. But a lot of the conversation did focus on whether I should tell Brad how he really is related. She asked if I'd want to know the truth if I were him, and the truth is that I really have no idea. What I do know is that if I learned the truth later, I'd feel really hurt to learn someone she else knew and just kept it from me. With that in mind, it felt obvious that I needed to tell Brad the truth. I texted him and we set up a meeting for lunch at a nice little diner about halfway between our cities. I told him about the fight I'd overheard as a kid, and built up the conversation I overheard in Aunt Debbie's kitchen. He kept acting confused, so I just had to tell him bluntly that we were not cousins, we're siblings. Then came the really hard part. I had to ask him what he wanted to do, and I told him how I thought about confronting Debbie and my father, but that I wasn't willing to do it without his blessing. So, after giving it some thought, Brad said that he wanted to confront his mother, but that he didn't want to do it alone. He asked if I would be there for him when he did it. I had the day off, and he said his mother should be home, so we went straight to Aunt Debbie's after lunch. When we got there, Debbie was at home knitting on the couch, and Brad told her that we needed to talk. He asked me beforehand to do the most of the talking, so, I let him. He told her that when he knew, with me only butting in, when Debbie wanted to answer about how he got the information. Debbie was clearly shocked and didn't know what to say at first, but she gained her composure quickly than I would have expected. She sat up straight, got a little huffy, and told us that she has no idea what the hell we're talking about. I should mention that around that time, Cole texted me that he had a flat tire. He didn't have a spare on him, but I had one in my car. So he asked if I could come by and help him, and Brad was getting a bit worked up trying to break through Debbie's facade, so I also subtly texted him to ask if we should try telling anyone else. So he just told me that he didn't know and that it was really hard right now, which was understandable, so I left my phone on the side table in case Cole sent me any updates and went back to talking with Debbie. Well, it wasn't much help. Brad even said that he would not say anything, and Rob, that it was up to Debbie to come clean herself, but that only made her more agitated. She accused me of poisoning her son's mind with lies and trying to turn him against her. She started screaming at me to get out of the home. It got to the point where there was no use in trying to talk to her, so I did what she asked, and Brad looked completely deflated when I left. I don't know what to do now. I could try confronting my father just to see if that gets better. Maybe he could talk some sense into Debbie, but either way, it will have to wait. I was so frazzled by Debbie kicking me out, I left my phone on her side table. Can't say I'm looking forward to going back to get that. But maybe with the pressure of having the son she's been lying to no longer in the room, she'll finally relax and come clean. I'm not getting my hopes up, though. Update number 2. To everybody who commented on my last update, I'm sorry that I stopped responding so abruptly. I'm writing this from my mother's old house, which I've had to remove from the Airbnb listing so I can live here while Cole and I separate. I didn't know, but things started escalating before I even wrote that update 3 days ago. When I left Aunt Debbie that day, I found Cole where he said his tire blew out and helped him change it while telling him what happened. For once, he didn't try to use some one-liner to make things better. He just stopped what he was doing, hugged me, and he held me close by the side of the highway. In that moment, I was more grateful than ever to have him in my life. After posting my update, while I was responding to your comments, he came into the room with a pained expression and told me we need to talk. He then showed me his phone, asked me to explain, and I was confused at first because it seemed like I was looking at text from me. After a second, I realized that they were screenshots of my own phone sent to Debbie. At first, I couldn't see what the big deal was. The screenshots she sent were my text with Brad. All I saw were a few texts of us just setting up lunch along with a text from Debbie's living room when I was trying to reassure him during the fight. Then I realized what I was really looking at. Some of the texts were missing, and out of the context, our messages looked like something else entirely. See, me asking to set up a private meeting and asking him not to tell anybody, deciding to meet halfway between our cities so we would not run into anyone we knew, then a text from her living room when I asked if we would tell anyone. And the most suggestive one of all, Brad saying, "It's really hard right now." Debbie had taken our text and essentially cobbled them together to make it look like Brad and I were having an affair. I reminded Cole that I'd already told him everything that happened when we were changing the tire. To his credit, he told me that he did stand up to Debbie because of that, but she managed to plant a seed of doubt by telling him that I'd left my phone behind after she caught me and Brad together, and that I was obviously making up a story to cover for myself. See, Cole and I were both sickened at the very thought that she would do something like that to me, to her own son for that matter. But Cole was even more sickened at the thought that it might be true. He left to go stay at a hotel for a couple of days, and before leaving, he tells me that Debbie wanted me there the next day at noon to pick up my phone. Needless to say, I showed up at Debbie's ready to mouth off, but when I got there, I was immediately thrown off my guard. Rob was there, as well as my father and my mom's parents, and Brad was sitting on the couch quietly weeping. They told me to sit next to him, and then they both tore into us. It seems Debbie told our entire family the same lie. We tried to explain what she was doing and why, but they would not listen. They were too disgusted at the idea of two cousins having an affair. It's ironic to think how much worse it would have sounded if they would known that he was my brother. But either way, the family disowned both of us. Rob went especially hard on Brad for accusing his own mother of cheating. After that, Brad went to a friend's while I went home. I couldn't think of who to call but Cole, but hearing the story again convinced him it was true, especially the fact that my own father had backed Debbie's story instead of coming clean about the affair. Cole could hardly believe one parent doing that to their child, let alone two of them. That's when he asked to separate, and I have no idea what to do now. I've tried reaching out to other members of the family, but they've all heard the story and none of them believe me. I wish I would never have learned that stupid truth at all. I was so much happier in denial. Updates number 3. Hey guys, it's me, and yes, I am back for an update. So, it's only been a week and a half since moving back into my old house, and I think I've already gained about 15 pounds. It's been a really great use of my vacation days, but I haven't had anyone around to care what I look like anyways. That being said, something interesting did happen a few days ago. Before I enlisted my house from Airbnb, I'd gotten some complaints about noises in the ceiling. A little less than a week ago, I started hearing them myself, and I know that squirrels used to get in there somehow when I was little, so I decided to check it out myself before calling pest control. I don't know about other places, but where I live, we don't really have attics like you see on TV. They're more like overhead crawl spaces, so aside from one time as a kid, I never went up there, really, for anything. The complaints were definitely accurate. It wasn't too bad, but the squirrels do have something of a mini graveyard up there, so I'll need to get that looked at. But the biggest surprise was the 2 boxes that I found. The first wasn't too surprising. It was just a lot of memories of me. Drawings I made as a kid, old stuffed animals I thought Mom threw away to replace when they got ratty. That kind of thing you assume growing up were lost and forgot. The other box was the one that really took me by surprise, because it was entirely dedicated to my father. Cards that he written for her for holidays, pictures of their wedding and honeymoon, ticket stubs from concerts they've seen. I thought that she hated him after they divorced. But it seems that she never completely let him go. Then I read the journal. It had sitting at the top of the box like it was the last thing that she put in. I thought it was in the wrong box at first because it started out with her learning that she was pregnant. It was so weird reading about your mom's relationship with me before I was even born. She documented every doctor's visit, her weight gain, the first time I kicked. She also documented some aspects of pregnancy that made me feel kind of grateful that Cole and I never had children. It continued like that after I was born. My first step, my first solid foods, my first day at school, everything. For days I spent all my free time just reading this deep dive into a woman's journey through parenthood. The times that I made her laugh, the times we fought, the times that I was sad and she was worried that she could not help me. But at some point the focus shifted, and it started to become clear why the journal had been in my father's box instead of mine. It started out gradual. My father and Aunt Debbie would miss a voice recital, and my mother worried that I'd be disappointed. Then they would miss a volleyball game, and she would worry that they were becoming unreliable, but she didn't really seem too paranoid yet. That changed a little before Debbie got pregnant with Brad. Dad would come home from work late, and she would think that he smelled a bit like Debbie's perfume. She started noting every time Dad complimented Debbie on what she was wearing or laughed too hard at one of her jokes. When Debbie got pregnant, Mom started noticing Dad was constantly asking for updates about things like what type of gender the baby is, or what Debbie wanted for the shower, and after Brad was born, Dad apparently went to see the baby without Mom a few times, and a few months later he called and left a message saying that he'd be home late for work. But he forgot to turn his phone off afterward, and she heard him talking to Debbie and learned everything. She didn't journal much during the divorce, and her focus returned to me after that. Right up until a few days before, what she did. Dad was apparently pressuring her to let me see Brad, and she would not give in. He eventually snapped and told her only a rotten mother would keep her daughter from meeting her brother. She started doubting herself after that, especially when her parents and other family kept telling her to stop being spiteful and forgive Father and Aunt Debbie for my sake. Well, that convinced her she was really a bad mother, and well, you know how that ended. I'm so furious right now, I don't even know what to do. But when I figure it all out, that awful man and woman who took my mother from me are going to be hearing from me very, very soon. Update number 4. Hey guys, it's me. I wasn't really thinking about updating, but it's been 2 weeks to write. Some parts won't make me sound great, but I don't care. I haven't been seeing my therapist since moving home, and I didn't start again after finding the journal. But after a few days of seething, I called Brad and told him everything. He wasn't quite as angry as I was, but he did see that this was the closest thing that we had to proof that Debbie lied about us. So he helped me come up with a plan. There was going to be a fundraiser the next Friday at Aunt Debbie's country club. She's been really involved in campaigning for the mayoral candidate they're raising funds for, and so she was going to be speaking at the event. Brad said a lot of the family was going to be there supporting her. Since fundraisers don't require club memberships to attend, we decided to go and show our support as well. For the dinner part of the fundraiser, Brad and I sat near the back of the room and did not talk to anybody. It seemed at one point like our grandparents saw us, but they didn't say anything. They were seated next to Debbie, Rob, and my father, but I don't think that the others saw us at all. So, Brad and I stayed quiet and waited for Debbie's speech. I can't tell you what it was about because I couldn't care less about women politics. I was just waiting for it to end as soon as she finished, and when people were starting to applaud, I stood up and banged my knife on a wine glass. Debbie had been about to turn and leave the stage, but she froze immediately in place upon seeing me. Her shock turned to confusion as I proposed a toast, thankful for all of her hard work and praising her amazing speech. Everyone also asked to give her another round of applause. Well, that won over most of the club members, so I said I would like to quickly read some statements by somebody who knows Debbie better than anyone. That's when I took out my mother's journal. Right there in front of a huge chunk of our family and most of the people in Debbie's social circle. I read all the wrong entries. The worst ones involving Debbie and my father. I didn't read everything because I was worried about getting kicked out before I could finish, but I let them hear about my mother's initial suspicion. The way my father acted before Brad's pregnancy, the message confirming that he was Brad's real father, and the way my grandparents took Debbie's side until it drove my mother to an early demise. By the time I left, Debbie and my father were both flustered with embarrassment. Rob looked absolutely furious, and my grandparents looked ashamed, while some of the other family members just looked befuddled. Like I suspected, I was removed from the club for causing a disturbance, but I could tell the damage was done. It wasn't even 24 hours before I started hearing from people, but I don't know how it's all going to play out just yet. So I might have that for another update. Until then, I'm just happy that this truth is out there. I hope people do the right thing with it. Final updates. Hey guys, I've been talking to the family for the past week since my last update, and I just don't know if it's true or not, but a few said that they knew nothing about the affair. Based on what was in the journal, it doesn't seem like it was mostly my grandparents taking Debbie's side. Neither my grandparents nor Debbie tried to call me. Probably the best result of all this was for Brad. Needless to say, Rob kicked Debbie out and is planning for a divorce, but he said Brad can stay as long as he wants. He apologized to Brad for everything that happened and for disowning him as a son. Brad said that Uncle Rob cried while telling Brad that he always loved him as a father, even if it was technically a lie. As for my dad, he invited me and Brad to dinner to make amends. He said that he had planned on coming clean, but Debbie had already convinced so much of the family about me and Brad that he felt outnumbered. Well, that might be true, but Brad and I have both decided not to speak with him again. Apparently, so has most of the family, including my grandparents. Even having forgiven the affair, they couldn't look at him after learning how he tormented my mother in her final days. It sounded like they're ignoring their own part in that, so I'll be cutting contact with them as well. That just leaves Cole. I called him and told him about the journal and everything that happened with it, and apparently Debbie had already called him to come clean and apologize. She also called to ask for a loan, because none of her country club friends will help her find a place to go. He said no, but he did forgive me and asked me to move back in. Honestly, I'm not ready. I thought clearing the air would make me feel some kind of relief, but it doesn't. At the end of the day, no matter what his reasons, he still believed Debbie more than he believed me. I don't know how to come back from that. He sounded miserable when I told him that, but he didn't challenge me on it. So I'm going to keep living in my mother's old house for a while. The 2-hour commute to work isn't going to be fun, but I don't know how long I'll do that. I might find something closer and just stay here permanently, closer to Brad and Rob. If a bit of space allows me to forgive Cole someday, maybe, just maybe, I'll invite him to move in with me. But I doubt I'll be updating about that. Actually, I kind of think I might just be taking up journaling. I've already got one that could use a happy ending.
Guys, let's review 2 comments. The first one says, when you talked about your father asking you to dinner, I was worried you might actually forgive that man. I'm glad you stuck to your morals, and frankly, I think big families are overrated. All you're really needing is a few close people in your life, as long as they're the right people, and it sounds like you've done a pretty dang good job at cutting off all the bad ones. I actually think that you had everything you needed to justify cutting them off a lot earlier, but sometimes we just learn our lessons whenever we learn them. Enjoy your newfound freedom, OP. Here's comment 2, which is a little bit different. It says, the most believable part of this story is the part where you haven't been to the therapy in weeks. I mean, holy hell. What kind of human being finds what basically amounts to a year-long note from your mom about what she did and then uses it as a weapon to embarrass people in front of their friends? Going no contact is fine, but you paraded your dead mother's personal thoughts and feelings in front of a bunch of strangers at some country club when they were just trying to enjoy a meal. I'd ask whether that makes you more of a narcissist or a sociopath, but I think the answer is just a flat-out yes. Just another in a family of monsters. What do you think of that harsh comment? Drop it down below and let's talk about it, guys. Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed today's story, and if you want more, make sure you subscribe. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and of course, remember,
It's cool to be kind. Peace.